Shipwreck Arcana is one of those games that is far easier to show you how it's played than to tell you how it's played. Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing this Shipwreck Arcana from Meromorph Games. This is a cooperative deduction game, a cooperative logic puzzle in which one player is effectively trying to figure out the most logical move, and then figuring out or hoping that the other players, the teammates, can also figure out what the most logical move would have been given the, well, reverse stepping it back, deconstructing the puzzle as it were. On your turn, you're going to go ahead and reach into this bag, which has the numbers 1 through 7 3 times each. You're going to select those numbers, and in this case, I'm going to show you everything, but normally you wouldn't see anything at all. I'm going to go ahead and show you that I have a 1 and a 7. And now from here, I have to play down these numbers in order to fulfill one of these cards, but the balance is I may have multiple options and I have to figure out which one makes the most sense for me. So let's go ahead and play this out. Again, I have a 1 and 7. The first card is 4 apart. If the difference between your fates is 4 or more, I can play one of them there. So I could go ahead and place the 1 or the 7 there, and it would be more than 4 apart. Over here we have factor. If one of your fates is double or triple the other, play one of them here. Again, I can't play this one here, because this is neither double nor triple. Over here we have the deep. If the sum of your fates is 5 or less, play one of them here. Now the sum of my fates is not 5 or less, so I cannot play one over here, which takes that out of the running. Over here we have 3, 4, 5. If one of your fates is 3, 4, 5 and the other is not, play the 3, 4, or 5 here, which again, can't do that one because my fates are not 3 or 5. So basically, the only place I can play one right now is on that first card with a but. The but is that the hours card is if you cannot play anywhere else, play one of your fates here, then move it one card to the right. So if none of these plays were legal, I could place one over here, and then I move it to the right. The reason to move it to the right we can ignore for now. It'll make sense shortly. So I'm going to go ahead and do what I have to do, which is I have to play a 1 or a 7 to that first card. Now I do have a choice as far as where I play that 1 or 7. A little bit of a choice, but let's go ahead and walk you through that. So to start off with, if the difference between your fates is 4 or more, place one of them here. Now the 7, if I place the 7 down over here, well, let's just go ahead and do so over here. I'm going to place the I'm going to go ahead and place the 1 over here. Okay, the 1's going to go over here, or not. You know what? No. I'm going to place the 7 over here. Okay, we're going to place the 7 over here, and let's walk it through. So, the other players, hopefully, and hopefully is the key word here, because they're all trying to follow a chain of, what's going on, of how this plays out. And what they're going to do is they're going to start with the fact by telling me how to reduce my number line. They're going to look at my number line and say, well, the difference of the fates has to be more than 7, right? It has to be more than 7, more than 4 apart. So therefore, it can't be a 6, it can't be a 5, and it can't be a 4. It could be a 1, 2, or 3, right? That's possible. Now, what they could do is they could look over here and say, if I played a 3, 4, 5, that over here, that my other card was not, then it's likely that it's not a 3. It's not a guarantee because I could have a 7 and 3, and I could have chosen to place it over here, thinking that this was the more obvious choice. Could have, but didn't. So maybe it is or maybe it isn't a 3. Not entirely sure. Oh, also it can't be a 7 as well because it has to be 4 apart. So it's probable that it's not a 3, not a guarantee. From there we're down to a 1 or a 2. A 1 or a 2 I would not have been able to place here, and a 1 or 2 would not have made a difference here. So now they're down to guessing whether it's a 1 or a 2, and this is the part where you could make a prediction or not. Or not is the key thing. Do they want to, do they not? Well, let's go ahead and see. Let's pretend that they go ahead and flip a coin, and they predict that I do have a 1 left in my hand. When they do so, I put the 1 down, and I show, look, you're right, and we move our prediction up by 1. We move our prediction up by 1. We're trying to get a total of 7 accurate predictions before the doom track reaches 7. We'll talk about how that advances as we go. That's round 1. Let's go ahead and do another player's turn, showing you once more how this plays out. And the combination of cards will always be different. The combination of fates will always be different. Although we do have these on the table now as evidenced fates. This one's going to stay over here. This one's going to stay over here. Now, the fact that the 7 over here has 3 notches on it, and the fact that this card has 4 moons, that means when this card has 4 or more on it, that card will fade. We'll talk about what fading does later, but the point is these cards don't stay in play forever. Had the 7 been played over here, then what you would have had is you would have had this card fading already, because we have 3 notches and 3 over there. This one over here has 1 notch, so each number has a different numeric value. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we have. We have a 2 and a 2. Well, that's potentially tricky. Let's go ahead and see how this plays out. So a 2 and a 2, let's try to figure this out again. Our numbers are not 4 apart, so we can't place this over here. Our factors are not double or triple the other, so we can't play it here. Our numbers are not 3 or 5, so we can't play it here, which means we have to place a 2 here. We don't have any agency at all. Let's just hope that they can figure it out. From there, they're going to go ahead and take a look. Again, we're going to have this player looking at this round. 4 apart. Well, if 4 apart might have been more likely or a better choice, we don't know for sure. If a fate is one, double or triple the other, that would have been a 4 or a 6. So it's likely that had we done a 4 or 6, it would have likely gone here, but not for sure. Again, not for sure. But we're going to go ahead and have you move the 4 and the 6 down. So those are out of play. From there, if our numbers were 4 apart, again, it seems like a potentially better choice over here. So we're going to go ahead and have you reduce the 7. Not the 5 though, because the 5 could still be eligible, so we'll see over there. Which leaves us with 3, 4, 5. Again, the 3, 4, 5 likely seems like it's not, but it could have been. It could have just as easily been. But also, if we place it over here, we know that it's not a 5. I don't know why we're playing games. The sum of the fates is 5 or less. We know that it's not a 5. Therefore, it's probably a 1, 2, or 3. Again, we could potentially reduce this 3, but it's, again, a bit of a balancing factor. Let's go ahead and reduce it. And from there, we have a question of whether it's a 1 or a 2. The tricky part is that we know that a 1 has already been played, and we know that a 2 has already been played, so we don't have any additional information of even the statistical likelihood of what would or wouldn't have made sense. Let's go ahead and guess for it, and I'm not going to bother finishing that because I know what the numbers are, so my guesses are a little meaningful. Or you could just hold off and not guess at all. Because the way the Doom track advances in this game is twofold. The first is whenever you make an incorrect guess, you're going to go out, let's say I guess a 1, I flip it over, it's a 2, unfortunate. We're going to go ahead at this point and advance the Doom track by 1. The Doom track should not reach 7 before the other cards reach 7. Additionally, whenever a card is fading, whenever you have a card that's fading, let's say this has been played over here for some reason, at that point at the end of this turn, this card now has 4, which means it's going to turn over and fade, and a new card will come out. 2 things will happen there, or a few things will happen. The first is whenever a card fades, you advance the Doom track by 2, unless, and this is a big unless you made a correct guess this turn. The turns in which you want to be very, very certain you're making the correct guess are when cards are fading. Cards fading will advance the Doom track by 2, but that means if you do guess wrong, you're going to be advancing the Doom track by 3, 1 for the failure and 2 for the card. But if you guess right, you can prevent the card, the timer on the game, from slowly running out, and that can be huge, so save your correct guesses or your logically whatever for those moments. And then the second thing is you now have an access to this fading card over here. These cards, once faded, give you a power you can utilize later in order to discard the card for some reason or another. For instance, this card, after playing their fate, the active player may discard this to discard one visible fate that is lower than their remaining fate. In other words, either as the person playing fates or as the guessers, you'll have opportunities to make additional adjustments to potentially help eliminate guesswork, which can be incredibly impactful on those turns where you need to play something, because when you need to correct or predict something in order to avoid the Doom track advancing 2 as a card fades. And that's basically the game. You're going to rinse and repeat this process, going back and forth, taking turns as the player of the fate. If a player ever does not guess, then you simply have a remaining fate left in your hand, which means next turn you draw 1 fate instead of 2, and you cannot indicate to the other players whether you're playing the old or the new fate, meaning you can't inherently use the logic from last time. You can potentially try to read into last time, but doing so is a bit of a risk because the players may have had to play their fate. You can't even come with these pre-established rules because depending on what you draw, you may have to play something that you otherwise didn't want to. You're going to rinse and repeat the process until eventually either Doom reaches 7 or you make 7 correct guesses, and that's the Shipwreck Arcana. Which brings us to the review, starting off the bat with ease of play. This game is incredibly easy to teach. The entire rulebook is, well, this is the entire rulebook over here. It's double-sided, mind you, but that's all of 6 very short pages with clarifications, with text. It's not the easiest to understand inherently. The rules do something I don't particularly like in games, which is they go through a bunch of concepts without teaching you anything else, so I kind of am mentally sticking what's going on in the game. I find this is a very easy game to teach, though, because you literally just go through what I did. You show people what's going on, you show them the process, you show them the deductive aspect going through your mind, and then you start the game, and they kind of pick it up right away. This is an easy game to teach, in my opinion. Rules are short and not that hard, but I think could have been better, although that is personal preferences to the way I like being taught rules. As far as player count, this is a 2 to 5 player game. I have so far played this at 2 and 4 players. I prefer it much more at 2, and it's worth noting that Board Game Geek has this ranked as best with 4. I found that with 2, I have more of an interactive back and forth of I take a turn, you take a turn, I take a turn, you take a turn, as opposed to the more players, well, specifically with 4, I found that I was, helping other players be involved in the guesswork. There is something nice about having other players to jump ideas back and forth off of, and to be like, no, it's probably this and probably that. It is nice to have that aspect, but I also like taking turns being the guesser as much as the guessee, and so, I don't know if that's a word. I imagine it's a word. But either way, I like taking turns of both sides of the thing, and so I preferred it at 2, but again, Board Game Geek has it rated best with 4, so take that into account. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking. Starting with the bat, this is a quick playing game. You're going to be knocking out games of this in 20, maybe 25 minutes once you're up and running. It is a fast-paced game in which you're going to go ahead, draw fates from the bag, look at those fates, make a decision as far as what makes the most sense, trying to play out not just what you're able to do, but what makes sense to do. I keep drawing these doubles here. This is insane over here. But you're trying to read through that, make those decisions. It plays quickly. The artwork, by the way, the artwork is absolutely gorgeous. Sometimes having to do with the cards, sometimes not, but it's just the art over here. It's very, very striking, very solid artwork. Really appreciated the art in the game. This is, I believe, Merry Morph Games has this in the other game as well. They have Atma, the role-playing card game. I believe they have similar art there. But overall, really enjoy and appreciate the artwork. And the deduction is satisfying. The deduction ranges a bit because, well, we'll talk about more on what I don't like as well, but overall, the combinations of cards you have often lends itself to trying to make a predictive guess where you're like, I could do this, this, or this. This is what I think makes the most sense. Hopefully they can backtrack that and follow that puzzle, and very often players do. The amount of times I go through the sequence of trying to play something down thinking, well, there's 2 or 3 options, I hope they can figure out what makes the most sense to me, and then the players actually do so, it is incredibly satisfying when that happens. And there's inherent variability to that deduction engine because of the fact that the entire game consists of 4 cards on the table, and then just having tons of card options, tons of variability to the way you can combine any 4 cards gives you a totally different puzzle each time with the same premise at play, the same core rules, but a different logical set of hoops to jump through, and I really appreciate that logical set of hoops. And that logical set of hoops gets better when you talk about the faded cards. These over here that give you these powers that you can utilize, because then you go down that extra step of, well, I'm going to play this here. I know that's going to result in this card fading. I know that leaves 2 possible options. I also know that they can use the faded card to limit it down to 1. Will they guess 50-50? Will they try to read through what makes sense to me? Or will they go ahead and not take the risk because this is not the turn to take that risk? You have all this aspect of the clue giver, so to speak, of being the person with the fates who's trying to figure out what your players, what your teammates are going to do, and it's very satisfying to go through that, and there's generally enough control to feel like you can win. Between reading the cards, the tiles set aside, between reading the statistical probability of what's left, between the fact that you're going to use these over here and use the puzzle at the table, and between knowing the other players and how they think, there's often enough going on here that you could win, although it's worth noting as well, there are different difficulty levels in the game, ranging from 4 different difficulty levels as far as how hard. Basically, it comes down to where you start the Doom Tracker. Do you start at 0, at 2, at 4, or at 6? Different difficulty levels giving you more or less room for things going wrong. As far as what I don't like, there's really 2 things. The first is that some card combinations are lame. That's the best way I can put it. So at the end of the day, you're relying on a combination of cards to give you the logical puzzle. And depending on the cards, some of the cards are more clever and interesting in different ways, which can be a lot of fun when combined with others. But if you have too many of these clever, interesting cards and you combine them in different ways, there have certainly been card combinations on the table where I was like, okay, we'll just play something down, and there's nothing you can really read into because we have a whole bunch of clever and interesting cards and not a bunch of logical deduction cards, and it's gotten to the point where we have occasionally, infrequently said, this puzzle is simply not going to work, let's reset and redeal the initial 4 cards, because sometimes you will not get a workable engine. It's the inherent balance of the fact that on the one hand you have tons of variability to that logical puzzle you're going through. On the other hand, sometimes that variability bites you and you have not much as far as a actual puzzle to wade through. Sometimes that does happen in the game. Additionally, the harder difficulties in this game, like I mentioned already, you can start with this different difficulties, which is nice because as you get better at the game, you'll find yourself winning more and more. But I do find the reverse problem is that as I want to scale up the difficulty, the game itself doesn't get more difficult. You just potentially get victim to an unlucky guess, an unlucky situation, and it just bites you harder. This is a game which, because of the fact that you can lose 3 doom in a single mistaken guess, by having the difficulty at the top notch is basically like, oh, it's at 6, and as soon as we get one thing wrong, the game's over. I wish the difficulty in this game had a different modular aspect to it, maybe putting fate tiles back in the bag, maybe something else that in some way did keep the puzzle alive while still giving you a degree of room for error, because I think the room for error is essential. This is not a game of perfect information. This is a game of mostly getting towards perfect information and inherently having things occasionally not work out well. So even though we have gotten better at the game as we've played it more, I find myself not increasing the difficulty because I don't find it makes the game more difficult. I just find it makes it more annoying when you inevitably have an incorrect incorrect guess or two that can happen. So I don't love the difficulty modulation to the game. As far as I can see others not liking, first of all, there's vague deduction. This is not perfect information. This is not. At the end of the day, you're trying to go through the process of trying to think what makes the most sense between this card and this card and that card and the fates on the table and the fates in your hand, and trying to read the other players and the room and trying to make that decision. But at the end of the day, sometimes you're just left with making a guess between two tiles, and yes, you can use your fates if you have them, but maybe you're saving it for later because right now nothing's fading. Which means you now make a guess between one or two options, and maybe you win, maybe you don't. It's vague deduction. It's not perfect information. Although, of course, you don't have to guess, except for when the fates are fading, in which case, then you are more likely incentivized to do so. And then secondly, it's a game where you can feel the reverse end of the spectrum, is that sometimes it's a game where it doesn't feel like you're making decisions. It feels like there's a game where there is a perfect answer, a most optimal play, and your goal is to find that optimal play, but once you've done so, ta-da, you're just walking through the motions of the rest of the game. And I don't disagree with that, but the reason that doesn't bother me is only because that is the game to me. To me, the game of Shipwreck Arcana is finding that optimal play on your end, and then having the other players find it on their end. It can potentially feel like you're not making decisions because your goal is to find the optimal play, make the optimal play, and then have them do the same. To me, the decision is about the finding of it, but you may find this more procedural than anything else if you're finding those optimal plays too easily. As far as final thoughts on Shipwreck Arcana, I really enjoy this game. The combination of playtime, the combination of accessibility, the variable player count, how easy it is to teach, how quick it is to play, the logical deduction aspect that is variable between the number of cards you have, and the tons of variability the game gives you, I really like it. This one's a 4 out of 5 for me. I really like it, I really enjoy it, but also understand that it is a little bit on the lighter side, and that deduction is a little bit more vague. This is the kind of game where, at the same time as I like it, and at the same time as I'm giving it a 4 out of 5, I do think that it might be just as much of a hit for you, or it might be a little bit less. This is the kind of game where I can see it working out either way, so I would caution you to focus very heavily on what does and doesn't work for me, and whether this is your type of game or not. As much as I enjoy it, I could totally see this being a total miss for someone else, especially if you're not the kind of person who likes this style of game. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, Hanabi. Hanabi's a classic game of, well, talking and trying to figure out things and putting a puzzle out in front of other players and having them try to read out. Same idea with that hidden information, that degree of cooperative, but not being able to say everything you want. And then similarly, Letter Jam. Letter Jam from CGE is another game focusing on words and letters and combinations, but again, that aspect of you knowing some things, them knowing others, and trying to figure out how to work together that cooperative puzzle together. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, have a good one.